What if a wall could speak? Not of stones and mortar, but of the lives, loves, and losses etched into its very foundation. For nearly 3 centuries, Hadrian's Wall stood as the northernmost frontier of the vast Roman Empire, a 73-mile-long testament to imperial ambition. We see it today as a majestic ruin, a scar across the rugged landscape of northern England. But was it merely a defensive barrier to keep out the barbarians of Caledonia? Or was it something more? A bustling, multicultural frontier zone where soldiers from Syria, Spain, and Gaul lived, worked, and raised families. A place of commerce, culture, and conflict, where Roman order clashed with Celtic spirit. This is the story of the wall not as a static monument, but as a living, breathing entity. We will unearth personal letters written on thin wooden tablets, revealing the daily anxieties and hopes of its inhabitants. We will uncover evidence of fierce rebellions that tested the might of Rome and explore the complex world of the people who called this wild frontier home. Join us as we look beyond the ramparts and discover the hidden history of Hadrian's Wall. The year is 122 AD. The Roman Empire, a sprawling behemoth of conquest and culture, is under the command of a new kind of leader. Publius Aelius Hadrianus Augustus, or Hadrian, is not his predecessor Trajan. Where Trajan saw endless horizons for expansion, Hadrian saw the fraying edges of an overstretched imperium. He was a consolidator, a pragmatist, an architect of empire rather than a mere conqueror. His journey to the remote, windswept province of Britannia was not a tour of triumph, but a mission of stabilization. Upon his arrival, he found a frontier in turmoil. The northern tribes, a loose confederation of peoples the Romans collectively called Caledonians, were a persistent and painful thorn in the side of the province. Decades of intermittent warfare had led to a volatile and unpredictable border, a bleeding wound that drained resources and manpower. Hadrian understood that a province could not prosper while constantly looking over its shoulder. He needed a definitive solution, a clear line drawn in the earth that would separate the Roman world from the Barbaricum, the lands of the barbarians. Standing on a desolate ridge, with the wind whipping his cloak, and the cries of unfamiliar birds in the air, the emperor conceived a project of breathtaking audacity. This would be no mere fence or earthen rampart. He envisioned a stone barrier, stretching from sea to sea, punctuated by forts, mile castles, and turrets. It was to be a symbol of Roman permanence, a testament to its engineering prowess and its unyielding will. More than a defensive line, the wall was to be a control mechanism for trade and movement, a customs barrier on an imperial scale. It was a declaration that here, at the very edge of the known world, the order and power of Rome began, and beyond it lay the untamed wilderness. The decision was made. The order was given. Across the 73 miles of rugged northern England, the grandest single construction project of the Roman Empire was about to begin, forever changing the landscape and the history of Britannia. The emperor's grand design was set in motion, a testament to one man's vision to tame a continent's wild frontier. The legions would trade their swords for chisels, their battle cries for the ring of hammers on stone, as they prepared to build the edge of the world. It was a monumental gamble, an assertion of control that would echo for centuries to come. The scale was unprecedented, the labor immense, but for an emperor determined to secure his legacy and his empire, no price was too high. Hadrian's decree was one thing. Its execution was a logistical and engineering marvel that beggars belief even today. The construction of the wall was an immense undertaking, requiring the mobilization of an entire provincial army and its resources. The first task was surveying. Roman military surveyors, the agrimensors, fanned out across the 73-mile isthmus, from the estuary of the River Tyne in the east to the Solway Firth in the west. They plotted the course with gut-string lines and groma, a simple but effective cross-staff instrument, choosing the most defensible high ground wherever possible. Then came the raw materials. Vast quarries were opened, and millions of cubic meters of sandstone and whinstone were hewn from the earth by hand. In areas where stone was scarce, particularly the western third, the initial plan called for a wall of turf, cut in uniform blocks and stacked like giant bricks. Forests were cleared to provide timber for the scaffolding, for the internal buildings of the forts, and for the fuel needed to fire lime kilns, which produced the mortar that would bind the structure together. The scale was staggering. It is estimated that the original stone wall, the broad wall, contained over 1 million cubic meters of stone, all moved and lifted without the aid of modern machinery. The project was a testament to Roman organization. Legions were divided into construction gangs, each responsible for a specific length of the barrier. The work was hard, relentless, and dangerous. The northern climate was unforgiving, with biting winds, persistent rain, and frigid winters. The threat from resentful local tribes was ever present, requiring some soldiers to stand guard while others laid stones. The design itself evolved during construction. The initial broad wall plan, some 3 meters thick, was soon superseded by a slightly thinner narrow wall, suggesting a need for haste or a reallocation of resources. Every Roman mile, a small fortlet or mile castle, was built with 2 watchtowers, or turrets, spaced equally between them. This network ensured that no part of the frontier was ever out of sight of a Roman sentry. It was a system of surveillance and control, built to dominate the landscape. The sound of construction would have echoed across the hills for years. The rhythmic clang of hammer on stone, the shouts of centurions, the creak of wooden cranes, and the groaning of ox carts. It was the sound of an empire imposing its will upon the very land, a monumental effort to build the edge of the world. Who built this colossal monument? The answer lies not with slaves or common laborers, but with the pride of the Roman military machine, the legionaries themselves. The construction was entrusted to vexellations, specialized detachments drawn from the 3 legions stationed in Britannia, the Legio II Augusta, the Legio VI Legio Foi Victrix, and the Legio Tex Ixiu ad Caboria Victrix. In total, some 15,000 of the empire's finest soldiers traded their swords for trowels, their javelins for mallets. A vexillation was a flexible and highly effective unit, a self-contained task force that could be deployed for special projects without moving an entire legion. For these men, building the wall was a military duty, executed with the same discipline and precision as a battle formation. Life for a soldier in a construction vexillation was a grueling routine of hard physical labor. From dawn until dusk, they quarried stone, dug the defensive ditches, mixed mortar, and hoisted the heavy blocks into place. It was back-breaking work, performed under the watchful eyes of their centurions. These tough, career officers were the project managers of the ancient world. They were responsible for a specific length of the wall, and their pride was on the line. To commemorate their work and, perhaps, to prove its completion to their superiors, they left their mark. Carved into the stone face of the wall are inscriptions known as centurial stones. These simple plaques bear the name of the century and its centurion, a permanent record of their contribution. The century of Gellius Philippus built this. The century of Cassius Proculus. These are not the names of emperors or generals, but of the men on the ground who got the job done. A healthy rivalry existed between the units, each century likely competing to build their section faster and better than the next. This system of dividing the work into manageable portions, assigned to specific units, ensured efficiency and accountability. By night, these builders reverted to their primary role as soldiers. They slept in temporary fortified camps, always on alert for potential attacks. They were the embodiment of the Roman ideal, disciplined, resilient, and multi-talented. They were not just conquerors. They were creators, engineers, and artisans. The wall stands today not only as a monument to an emperor's ambition, but also as a testament to the skill, endurance, and organized might of the ordinary Roman legionary. With the Great Wall complete, its purpose shifted from construction to occupation. The men who manned this frontier were a world away from the stereotypical image of a Roman soldier from Italy. By the 2nd century, the legions that built the wall had moved back to their primary fortresses, leaving the day-to-day garrisoning to a different kind of soldier. The auxiliary. These were troops recruited from the conquered provinces of the vast Roman Empire, men who had earned their place in the army but not yet full citizenship. The wall became a vibrant, multicultural melting pot, a microcosm of the empire itself. Along its length, you would find Batavian cavalry, like the famed cohors I Batavarum, from the lowlands of modern Holland, renowned for their ability to swim across rivers in full armor with their horses. There were skilled archers from Syria, their composite bows a deadly advantage in the damp Britannic air. From Spain, the hardy cohors Iastrum brought their resilience forged in the mountains. Infantry cohorts arrived from Gaul, bringing their own traditions, languages, and gods to this remote northern edge. Life was a mixture of crushing boredom and stark, sudden terror. The psychological toll of staring out into the mists of Caledonia was immense, a gnawing isolation where the landscape itself felt like an enemy. It was the fear of the sudden, brutal raid, a war cry from an unseen foe shattering the morning mist. Days could be spent in monotonous routine. Patrol, guard duty, training, and maintenance of their armor and equipment. The diet was simple but plentiful: grain for bread and porridge, some meat, and imported luxuries like wine and olive oil, for those who could afford them. We know their intimate concerns thanks to the remarkable Vindolanda tablets, thin wooden letters preserved in the soil. Here, soldiers request more cerveza and warmer socks, and we even read a birthday invitation from a commander's wife, Claudia Severa, a poignant echo of civilized life on the edge of the world. The forts themselves, like housesteads or chesters, were not just barracks, they were miniature towns. Behind the security of the stone walls were workshops, hospitals, granaries, and temples. Here a fascinating religious syncretism occurred. Altars to Jupiter stood near subterranean shrines to the Persian god Mithras, a mystery cult popular with the military and sacred wells honoring local Celtic deities like Coventina. The most important building after the commander's house was often the bathhouse, a center for hygiene, relaxation, and social life. Interaction with the native Britons was complex. While the wall was a barrier, it was also a permeable membrane. Trade flourished at designated gates, with locals exchanging cattle, hides, and grain for Roman goods. Some soldiers formed relationships with local women, raising families on the frontier. These connections blurred the lines between occupier and occupied, creating a unique Romano-British culture that existed only in the shadow of the Great Wall. These auxiliaries, men from a sundered empire, became the true faces of the frontier, their lives a testament to the daily reality of holding the line at the edge of the world. History is often the story of emperors and battles, of grand events recorded on stone and bronze. But what of the everyday lives of those who lived in the shadow of Hadrian's wall? For centuries, their voices were silent, lost to the damp earth of Britannia. Then, in March 1973, at the fort of Vindolanda, just south of the wall, archaeology made a discovery of unparalleled importance. During excavations led by Robin Burley in the oxygen-free, waterlogged layers of a Roman rubbish dump, excavators found what looked like thin, discarded wood shavings. At first, they were dismissed. But Burley's careful eye noticed faint markings. But these were not shavings. They were letters, hundreds of them. These are the Vindolanda tablets, wafer-thin postcards of wood, on which the inhabitants of the fort wrote to each other in carbon ink. Crafted from local birch, alder, and oak, these slivers of wood were scored down the middle and folded, their messages written on the inner surfaces. The unique anaerobic conditions of the soil had preserved the wood and, miraculously, the ink for nearly 2,000 years, primarily dating from the period of 97 to 105 AD, just before the wall itself was conceived. Suddenly, the silence of the frontier was broken by a torrent of whispers. These are not grand historical pronouncements. They are deeply personal, intimate, and wonderfully mundane. We read a soldier, maskless, from the 9th cohort of Batavians, writing to his commander, Flavius Cerealis, requesting more beer for his men, a critical matter of morale. We see a request for leave, comitus, from a soldier desperate to see his family. One decurion reports the state of his troops, noting how many are unfit for duty due to eye inflammation, a common ailment in the smoky, windswept fort. We find lists for supplies: goatskin, leather, sinew, and tallow. We hear the voices of merchants and craftsmen. There are reports on the fighting readiness of the troops and derogatory comments about the local Britons, disdainfully called Britunculi or Little Brits. This single word betrays the complex Roman attitude, a mixture of imperial arrogance and a grudging respect, even fear, for the natives who knew the terrain and were masters of ambush. Perhaps the most famous tablet of all is a birthday invitation. It is from a woman, Claudia Severa, the wife of a nearby commander, Aelius Brachus, to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina, the wife of Vindolanda's commander, Cerealis. Dated around 100 AD, it is a simple invitation to celebrate Severa's birthday on September 11th. Written in a formal hand by a scribe, it ends with a personal, touchingly informal postscript in what is believed to be Claudia's own handwriting. "I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper, and hail." This closing, penned in a different, more fluid script, is the earliest known example of female handwriting in Latin. In that one sentence, the gulf of 2 millennia disappears. These tablets transform the anonymous figures of history into real people with friends, families, worries, and desires. They complain about the weather, ask for warmer socks and underpants to fend off the brutal northern cold, and plan parties. They reveal homesickness, camaraderie, and the daily grind of military life on the edge of the known world. They are the most important historical documents ever found in Britain, giving us an unfiltered, authentic glimpse into the vibrant, complex, and very human world of the Roman frontier. a world that existed even before the great stone curtain of Hadrian's wall was drawn across the landscape. The wall was more than a line of stone and soldiers. It was a magnet. And where soldiers gathered, a different kind of settlement inevitably bloomed. These were the vici, the sprawling, vibrant, and chaotic civilian towns that grew in the shadow of the forts. At places like Vindolanda and Salernum, these settlements sprawled for hundreds of meters, a testament to the powerful draw of the Roman military economy. They were the unofficial, beating heart of the frontier, a world away from the rigid discipline of the barracks. Here, life was lived in timber-framed buildings that lined muddy streets, a stark contrast to the severe geometry of the Roman stone. The air, thick with the smoke of hearths and forges, carried a symphony of sounds. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of merchants haggling in a dozen different dialects, the laughter from a crowded tavern. The sharp tang of spilde mingled with the scent of roasting meat and damp earth. Here, the rigid hierarchies of the legion dissolved. A centurion might share a drink with a humble trader, their status temporarily forgotten in the communal warmth. The vicus was a microcosm of the empire itself. A retired legionary from Spain might run a tavern, serving Gallic wine to a Syrian archer and his local Britannic wife. A craftsman from Germania could be seen meticulously tooling leather for sandals, his workshop next to a pottery stall selling wares that mimicked fashionable Samian forms. We see this fusion in the poignant story of Barades of Palmyra, a Syrian standard-bearer, and his wife, Regina, a former slave from the Cativalonian tribe. Their tombstone, found near the fort of Arbea, depicts her not as a barbarian, but as a sophisticated Roman matron, holding her spindle and wool basket, a testament to love and cultural assimilation on this remote edge of the world. These were not just camps, they were communities. They provided everything the soldiers officially could not have but desperately needed: family, entertainment, and the comforts of a life beyond military routine. Temples and shrines dotted the landscape of the vicus, dedicated to a pantheon as diverse as the populace itself. One might find a formal dedication to Jupiter Optimus Maximus just streets away from a hidden Mithraeum, where soldiers initiated into the Persian mystery cult shared a ritual meal in a cavern-like sanctuary. Nearby, a spring might be sacred to a local water goddess, like Coventina at Caraburg, her shrine filled with offerings of coins and brooches from hopeful worshippers. Bathhouses were social hubs, places for gossip and business deals as much as for hygiene. Shops sold everything from exotic foodstuffs like olives and figs, shipped from the Mediterranean, to locally produced wool cloaks. The economy thrived on both official contracts and a robust black market. Soldiers, paid in silver denarii, spent freely, creating a cash-rich environment that attracted entrepreneurs and criminals alike. Yet, this symbiotic relationship was a double-edged sword. The vici were a source of intelligence, supplies, and manpower for the army, but they were also a vulnerability. Unfortified and sprawling, they were the first targets during a raid, their civilian inhabitants paying the price for living on the edge. Imagine the terror of a sudden alarm in the dead of night, the panicked shouts, the orange glow of that catching fire, the swift, brutal violence of a Pictish or Scotty warband. The Great Conspiracy of 367 AD saw a coordinated barbarian assault that overran the frontier, and in its aftermath, archaeological layers of ash and destruction in many vici tell a silent, grim story of devastation. Life in the vicus was a gamble, a constant negotiation between opportunity and peril, where the promise of profit and a new beginning was measured against the ever-present threat from the wildlands just beyond the horizon. It was here, in these messy, dynamic towns, that the true character of the frontier was forged, a hybrid world, part Roman, part British, and entirely unique. History often remembers the frontier as a man's world, a domain of legionaries and centurions. But this is a partial truth. The stones of Hadrian's wall, if they could speak, would tell tales not just of soldiers, but of the women who shared their lives and built a new society in their wake. Officially, soldiers during their 25-year service were forbidden to legally marry. But reality, as it so often does, ignored imperial decree. In the vici, and even within the commander's residences, women were a constant and vital presence. They were wives, partners, mothers, daughters, and entrepreneurs. They were the social glue that transformed military outposts into homes. The most intimate glimpse into their world comes from the Vindolanda tablets. Here, on wafer-thin sheets of wood, we find the voice of Claudia Severa, wife of a fort commander, writing a birthday invitation to her friend, Sulpicia Lepidina. The elegant script, possibly the earliest known example of a woman's handwriting in Latin, is a powerful testament to their literacy and their rich social networks. She speaks of friendship and celebration, human concerns that transcend the harsh reality of the frontier. These women were not passive bystanders. They managed households, controlled finances, and ran businesses. Evidence shows them as tavern keepers, textile producers, and traders. They navigated a complex cultural landscape, often coming from diverse corners of the empire or being local women who formed relationships with the newcomers. In their homes, we see a fusion of cultures. Roman cooking pots sat alongside native British spinning whorls. Children were given Roman names but were raised with an understanding of the local customs and landscape. These women were the primary agents of Romanization, not through force, but through the daily, quiet acts of building a family and a community. They were the weavers, not just of cloth, but of a new, hybrid Romano-British identity that would define the province for centuries. They endured the same dangers as the men, raising children in the shadow of potential conflict, proving that resilience and strength on the frontier were not exclusively male virtues. Their legacy is a reminder that to understand the wall, we must look beyond the ramparts and into the homes they built. On the edge of the known world, faith was not a luxury, it was a necessity. For the thousands of men and women living along Hadrian's wall, separated from their homelands by vast distances, the gods provided comfort, a sense of identity, and hope against the uncertainties of frontier life. The spiritual landscape of the wall was as diverse and complex as its population. Officially, the cult of the emperor and the great gods of Rome, Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva held sway. Grand inscriptions and formal altars at every fort paid homage to the state religion, a public declaration of loyalty and Roman identity. But beneath this official veneer, a more personal and eclectic spirituality thrived. Soldiers, auxiliaries, and merchants brought their own gods with them. A Syrian archer might offer a prayer to Jupiter Dolicinus, a deity from his homeland syncretized with the Roman king of the gods. A cohort of Tungrian soldiers from modern-day Belgium erected altars to their native goddesses. This was a celestial marketplace where faiths from across the empire met and mingled. Perhaps the most intriguing of these imported beliefs was the mystery cult of Mithras. In small, dark, subterranean temples known as Mithraea, initiates gathered for secret ceremonies centered on the god of light, who is famously depicted slaying a bull. These exclusive, all-male brotherhoods offered a promise of salvation and a powerful bond of solidarity, appealing deeply to the military mindset. Yet, the Roman and Eastern gods were not the only deities present. The landscape itself was already sacred to the native peoples. The Romans, pragmatic in matters of faith, often acknowledged and assimilated these local spirits. At a spring near the fort of Caraburg, soldiers and civilians alike left thousands of coins and offerings for Coventina, a local water goddess. Elsewhere, the Celtic god Bellaticadros, the fair shining one, was worshipped by soldiers seeking protection. This religious syncretism, the blending of Roman and native deities, reveals a frontier characterized not just by conflict, but also by accommodation. An altar dedicated to Apollo Meponus shows how a great Roman god could be fused with a local Celtic deity of youth and music. The wall was a spiritual fault line, a place where different beliefs collided, coexisted, and created something new, a unique pantheon for a unique place. From the towers of the wall, Roman soldiers stared north into a world they called Caledonia. It was a land of mist, mountains, and what they saw as intractable wilderness. In their writings, they painted a picture of its inhabitants as savage, wild, and uncivilized, a terrifying other that justified the very existence of the wall. They spoke of tribes who fought from chariots, lived in primitive huts, and went into battle with their bodies painted, earning them the later name, the Picts, or painted people. But this Roman caricature, born of fear and imperial propaganda, obscures a more complex reality. Who were the people beyond the northern ramparts? Archaeology allows us to step past Roman accounts and into their world. They were not a single, unified nation, but a mosaic of Iron Age tribes, each with its own territory, traditions, and political structure. Their societies were centered not on cities, but on formidable hill forts, brooks, huge stone towers, and well-defended farmsteads. These were sophisticated structures, testaments to a powerful social organization and considerable engineering skill. Far from being simple savages, they were skilled farmers, metalworkers, and artists, creating intricate and beautiful objects like the enigmatic Pictish symbol stones. Their warfare was not the undisciplined frenzy described by Roman historians. They were masters of their own terrain, employing guerrilla tactics that frustrated and confounded the ordered legions. They would strike suddenly from the cover of forests or bogs, attacking supply lines and isolated patrols before melting back into the landscape. This was the warfare of resistance, the strategy of a people refusing to be conquered. The relationship was not one of constant, total war. There was also trade, diplomacy, and exchange. Northern amber and animal hides found their way into the vici, and Roman goods like wine and glass have been discovered in northern settlements, far beyond the wall. Treaties were made and broken, and alliances shifted. The people of the north were not passive victims of Roman aggression. They were active agents in their own history, a persistent, resilient presence that defined the limits of Roman power. They were the reason the wall was built, and their constant pressure ensured it would remain a contested, dangerous, and ultimately temporary frontier. For a generation, Hadrian's wall had served its purpose. It was a clear, defensible line, a symbol of Rome's power and its limits. But empires are driven by ambition, and emperors by the need for glory. In 142 AD, 2 decades after Hadrian's project was completed, a new emperor, Antoninus Pius, decided to gamble. Lacking the military prestige of his predecessor, and seeking a swift triumph to legitimize his peaceful accession, he ordered his ambitious governor of Britannia, Quintus Lollius Urbicus, to lead his legions north, deep into Caledonia. The plan was to build a new frontier, 100 miles north of the old one, running from the Firth of Forth to the Firth of Clyde. This was the Antonine Wall. But it was a pale imitation of its predecessor. Where Hadrian had built with stone for the ages, Antoninus built with turf and timber for the moment. Soldiers from the 2nd, 6th, and 20th legions cut millions of precise turf blocks, like giant earthen bricks, and laid them upon a stone foundation to create a rampart nearly 4 meters high. The new wall was a formidable earthwork, a rampart of layered turf built upon a stone foundation, fronted by a wide, deep ditch. But it lacked the permanence and imposing presence of Hadrian's creation. Forts were packed closer together, but they were smaller, their wooden walls a stark contrast to the stone gateways of the south, and the garrison was stretched thin across a hostile territory, far from its main supply bases. The local peoples, including the fierce Meatae and their Caledonian allies, who had been contained by Hadrian's wall, were now trapped between 2 Roman frontiers. Their reaction was immediate and ferocious. This was not the open-field battle the legions craved, but a shadow war of brutal raids on isolated patrols and relentless attacks on vulnerable supply lines. The years of the Antonine occupation were not years of peace, but of constant, draining warfare, a simmering insurgency that bled the garrisons dry. The gamble had failed. The cost in resources and manpower to hold this advanced line was simply too high. Around 162 AD, with the accession of Marcus Aurelius and new, more pressing wars erupting on the Danubian and Parthian frontiers, the empire's resources were stretched to breaking point. After only 20 years, a single generation, the order was given. The Romans abandoned the Antonine Wall. Forts were systematically slighted, gates burned, barrack blocks torn down, ditches filled in a deliberate act to deny their use to the enemy. For the soldiers, it must have been a bitter, humiliating retreat. The legions fell back, falling back to the familiar, solid, and defensible line of Hadrian's Wall. The Antonine Wall was a brief, expensive, and ultimately failed experiment. It stands as a powerful lesson in imperial overreach, an admission that Roman power was not infinite. The retreat was a quiet acknowledgement that the wild lands of Caledonia could not be tamed, and that Hadrian, in his cold, calculating pragmatism, had drawn the line in the right place. The grassy, eroded mound that is all that remains of the Antonine Wall today is a subtle but profound monument to the limits of ambition and the enduring resilience of the people who refused to be conquered. The completion of Hadrian's Wall was not a conclusion, but a provocation. To Rome, it was a magnificent statement of order, a definitive line between civilization and the wild. But for the tribes of northern Britannia, particularly the powerful confederation of the Brigantes whose lands the wall now bisected, it was a scar upon their world. It was a daily, unblinking reminder of foreign domination, a stone serpent severing ancient pathways, dividing communities, and disrupting the seasonal rhythms of life and trade that had existed for centuries. The first rebellions were not grand, pitched battles of legend. They were a death by 1,000 cuts. A festering wound of resentment that erupted in sudden, violent flashes. It began with cattle raids, not for simple theft, but as a deliberate act of defiance. It escalated to the ambush of Roman patrols in the treacherous bogs and dense woods that flanked the frontier. A small cohort, marching between mile castles, might suddenly find the path blocked, the air filled with the terrifying sound of war horns, and the silent hills alive with warriors who appeared like ghosts from the bracken and mist. Archaeologists unearthed the evidence of these clashes in the burned layers of smaller forts, in the hastily buried caches of Roman equipment, and in the profusion of native spearheads found within Roman defenses. These were not attempts to topple the empire, not yet. They were expressions of rage and a refusal to be pacified. For the Roman auxiliaries garrisoned on the wall, many of whom were from distant provinces like Gaul or Batavia, this was a uniquely challenging posting. It was a constant, low-level war fought against an almost invisible enemy who knew the terrain intimately. The psychological toll was immense. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every gust of wind could carry a whispered warning. The Romans would retaliate, of course, with brutal efficiency. Legions would march north of the wall on punitive expeditions, setting villages aflame and making examples of captured chieftains. Yet, this only hardened the resolve of the Britons. Each act of suppression planted new seeds of discontent, ensuring that the peace along the frontier was merely a lull in a storm that was perpetually gathering. The wall stood, but the land itself remained untamed, and its people were far from conquered. The first generation of Britons to live in the wall's shadow learned a bitter lesson. Resistance was perilous, but submission was unthinkable. The conflict had just begun. This initial phase of rebellion set the stage for a century of simmering hostility, a long and bloody conversation between the eagle and the tribes it sought to cage. It was a conflict that would ultimately shape the destiny of the entire province, proving that a line on a map, even one made of stone, can never truly contain the spirit of a people determined to remain free. The embers of these early fires of rebellion would never be fully extinguished, waiting only for the right wind to be fanned once more into a consuming flame. By the mid-4th century, the Roman Empire was a giant straining under its own weight, its frontiers vast and its enemies numerous. In the winter of 367 AD, the province of Britannia, long considered a relatively secure, if remote, outpost, was about to be plunged into chaos. A storm of unprecedented scale was gathering beyond the northern frontier, a coordinated assault so audacious it would be known to history as the Great Barbarian Conspiracy. This was no mere tribal raid. It was a multi-pronged invasion of shocking sophistication. From the north, the Picts of Caledonia poured across the now-neglected wall. From the west, Scotty raiders from Hibernia harried the coastlines. They were joined by the mysterious Attacadi, a fierce tribe whose origins are still debated. But the most devastating blow came from within. The Ariani, the frontier intelligence agents, Britons employed by Rome to patrol beyond the wall and report on enemy movements, betrayed their masters. Bribed or coerced, they fed false information to the Roman commanders, ensuring the garrisons were unprepared and wrongly positioned. The result was catastrophic. The coordinated attacks overwhelmed the frontier defenses. Numentius and Ruricius, the two senior Roman commanders in Britain, were ambushed and neutralized. Forts along the wall, once symbols of impregnable power, were overrun and sacked. The civilian population, which had grown accustomed to the security of the Pax Romana, was now exposed to the full fury of the invaders. Towns were looted, villas were burned, and a wave of terror swept southwards through the province. The carefully constructed Roman order in Britannia collapsed into anarchy. With the military command structure shattered and the frontier wide open, the province was on the brink of being lost entirely. News of the disaster eventually reached Emperor Hadrian in Gaul. His response was decisive. He dispatched one of his most able generals, Count Theodosius, the father of the future emperor of the same name. Theodosius assembled a relief force of elite legions and set sail for Britannia, not knowing the full extent of the devastation he would find. His mission was not simply to repel invaders, but to reconquer a Roman province that had fallen from within. As his fleet crossed the Channel in the spring of 368 AD, he faced a monumental task. The conspirators had shattered the illusion of Roman permanence. Theodosius was sailing towards a land in flames, a place where Roman authority had evaporated. The question was no longer just about restoring the border. It was about whether Britannia itself could be saved from descending completely into a collection of warring tribal territories. The fate of an entire province rested on his shoulders. While the story of Hadrian's Wall is often told through the clash of swords and the marching of legions, another, equally transformative narrative was unfolding in its shadow. The story of commerce. The wall was more than a military barrier. It was a powerful economic engine that fundamentally reshaped life on the frontier for Romans and Britons alike. At the foot of every major fort, bustling civilian settlements known as vici sprang to life. These were not mere soldier towns. They were vibrant, multicultural hubs of enterprise. Here retired veterans, merchants, artisans, and local Britons mingled, creating a unique frontier society. The soldiers of the garrison, with their regular pay, represented a massive consumer base in a previously unmonetized region. Their demand for goods and services fueled a thriving local economy. British farmers found a ready market for their grain, livestock, and wool. Local artisans sold leather goods, textiles, and pottery. In return, the Britons gained access to the manufactured goods of the empire. Fine Samian ware pottery from Gaul, glass vessels from the Rhineland, and perhaps most desired of all, wine from the Mediterranean. The mile castles and turrets were not just defensive positions. They were controlled points of entry, functioning as customs posts where trade could be managed and taxed. This flow of goods created a complex web of economic interdependence. A British chieftain might resent the Roman presence, but he also likely coveted a Roman-made brooch or drank from a Roman glass goblet. The introduction of Roman currency revolutionized local systems of barter and exchange. Suddenly, value was standardized, debts could be quantified, and wealth could be accumulated in the form of silver and bronze coins. This economic integration was a powerful tool of Romanization, perhaps more effective than force of arms. It drew the native population into the Roman orbit, tying their prosperity directly to the stability of the frontier. The vici became melting pots where Roman and British cultures met and merged, creating a hybrid Romano-British identity. But this prosperity was fragile, utterly dependent on the Roman military. The economy of the edge was a garrison economy. The coins that paid for British grain were the same coins that paid the soldiers who patrolled the wall. This created a profound and dangerous dependency. As long as the legions remained, the frontier thrived. But the question that must have lingered in the minds of the merchants and farmers of the vici was a troubling one. What would happen if the eagle, and its silver, were to one day fly away? The answer would spell the end of this unique world, leaving the bustling market towns to crumble back into the earth, their prosperity a fleeting memory on the edge of the empire. To see Hadrian's Wall is to see the mark of Rome. But what of those who saw it first from the other side? For the native peoples of northern Britain, the wall was not a frontier. It was an intrusion, a stone boundary drawn through the heart of their ancestral lands. To understand their story is to look beyond Roman accounts and piece together a world that existed in the eagle's shadow. Before the legions came, this was a landscape of powerful tribal confederations, of communities centered on formidable hill forts with great earthen ramparts. Life was dictated by the seasons, by kinship ties, and by a complex tapestry of spiritual beliefs rooted in the land itself. Society was organized around chieftains and warrior elites, their power demonstrated through feasting, gift-giving, and success in local warfare. The arrival of Rome and the subsequent construction of the wall shattered this world. The response of the Britons was not uniform. It was a complex spectrum of resistance, adaptation, and collaboration. Some, like the warriors who ambushed Roman patrols, chose open defiance, fighting a guerrilla war against a technologically superior foe. For them, the wall was a cage to be broken. Others chose a path of pragmatism. They saw the futility of direct confrontation and sought to find a place within the new order. A chieftain's son might see opportunity in joining the Roman auxiliaries, gaining a steady wage, Roman citizenship, and a status that his peers back in the village could not match. This created deep divisions within families and clans, pitting brother against brother. Collaboration did not necessarily mean surrender. It was often a survival strategy. Archaeological discoveries reveal this complex fusion. In the settlements near the wall, we find roundhouses built next to rectangular Roman-style buildings. We unearth pottery that blends native forms with Roman decorative techniques. These hybrid objects are the silent witnesses to a culture in transition, a people navigating a profound identity crisis. They were not simply becoming Roman. They were forging something new, a Romano-British identity. They adopted Roman goods, but used them in their own ways. They might worship at a Roman-style temple, but make offerings to a traditional Celtic deity. Life under the eagle's shadow was a constant negotiation. It was about preserving tradition while embracing change, about maintaining a sense of self while living under the gaze of a foreign power. The Britons were not passive victims of history. They were active agents, shaping their own destiny in a world irrevocably altered by the stone line that stretched from sea to sea. Their resilience ensured that when the legions finally departed, it was not a Roman province that was left behind, but a land of people whose identity had been tempered, but not broken, by centuries of life on the edge of an empire. History is often written in stone and steel, in the grand narratives of empires and battles. But sometimes, the most profound truths are found in the faintest of whispers, etched not on monuments, but on scraps of wood. At the fort of Vindolanda, just south of where Hadrian's wall would eventually stand, the unique waterlogged, oxygen-free soil, packed with bracken and clay, performed a miracle. It created an anaerobic time capsule, preserving the most fragile of organic artifacts. Thin, postcard-sized slivers of birch wood, covered in carbon-based ink, detailing the everyday correspondence of the fort's inhabitants. These are the Vindolanda tablets, and they open an intimate, unparalleled window into the lives of the people who called this remote frontier home. For centuries, these voices were silent, locked away in the earth. Then, in March 1973, archaeologist Robin Burley, excavating a refused ditch, stumbled upon what looked like discarded wood shavings. But on closer inspection, he and his wife Patricia realized they were holding something extraordinary: folded wooden leaves covered in writing. The discovery began to rewrite our understanding of Roman Britain. These are not the grand pronouncements of emperors or generals. They are the mundane, relatable, and deeply human concerns of soldiers, officers, merchants, slaves, and even their wives and children. One tablet, likely dictated by a soldier named Masclus, contains a desperate plea to his family for more socks, sandals, and underwear to endure the harsh, damp northern winters. We can almost feel his chill, huddled in a watchtower, the freezing rain seeping into his bones, his thoughts turning not to glory, but to the simple comfort of a warm, dry pair of socks. Another is a meticulous logistical report, the daily pulse of the garrison, detailing the number of soldiers present, on duty, or sick, and accounting for vital supplies of wheat and cerevisia, the Celtic beer that fueled the auxiliary troops. Then, a different fragment reveals the darker side of the occupation. A scornful comment from one soldier dismisses the local Britons with a derogatory nickname, Britunculi, or wretched little Britons, revealing the casual contempt and psychological barrier that often existed between occupier and occupied. Yet, among the hundreds of military and administrative notes, one tablet, numbered 291, stands apart. It is an invitation written around 100 AD, a generation before the wall was even conceived. In elegant, flowing script, a woman named Claudia Severa, wife of Aelius Brachus, the commander of a nearby fort, invites her friend Sulpicia Lepidina, wife of Vindolanda's own commander, Flavius Cerealis, to her birthday party. On the third day before the Ides of September, sister, the letter begins. For the day of the celebration of my birthday, I give you a warm invitation to make sure that you come to us, to make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival. The body of the letter is penned by a professional scribe, typical for the era. But the final greeting, the part that truly electrifies historians, is written in a different, slightly less practiced hand. It is added by Claudia Severa herself. This postscript is one of the earliest known examples of Latin handwriting by a woman ever found. In these few, precious words, she adds a personal touch that transcends 2 millennia. I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper and hail. Here, on the edge of the known world, is a profound expression of female friendship. Imagine Lepidina, holding this thin wooden leaf, the ink a stark black against the pale grain. In a life defined by military protocol and the wild northern frontier, this letter was not just an invitation. It was a lifeline of connection, a testament to civility and affection, and a whisper from a dearest soul that still echoes with startling clarity today. The dawn of the 3rd century brought not peace, but an emperor forged in the crucible of civil war. In 208 AD, a new and formidable presence arrived in Britannia. Lucius Septimius Severus. He was nearly 60, an African-born emperor, hardened by decades of campaigning and afflicted with debilitating gout. Yet his will was pure iron. He came not merely to repair the frontier, but to extinguish the Caledonian threat forever. He saw the wall not as a defensive line but as a springboard for a final, decisive conquest. The scale of his expedition was staggering. An army of over 40,000 men, a massive fleet to supply them, and the entire imperial court, including his ambitious and fractious sons, Caracalla and Geta. The wall thrummed with activity, its forts and supply depots overflowing as the staging ground for the largest military operation Britannia had ever witnessed. North of the wall, the campaign was a brutal slog. Severus, often too ill to ride, directed the war from a litter. His legions carved roads through dense forests and navigated treacherous bogs, pushing deeper into the misty highlands than any Roman army before them. There were no pitched battles. The northern tribes waged a punishing guerrilla war, melting into the landscape, striking supply lines, and inflicting a steady drain on Roman manpower. The emperor's strategy was one of attrition and terror. He ordered his men to show no mercy, to harry the population relentlessly. The cost was immense, both in Roman lives and resources. After 2 years of grinding warfare, with the northern tribes battered but not broken, the aging emperor's health failed completely. He was forced to retreat south to Eboracum, modern-day York. As he lay in his final days, his body racked with pain but his mind still sharp, he is said to have offered his last piece of advice to his sons, a chilling testament to his worldview: "Enrich the soldiers, and scorn all other men." With his passing in 211 AD, the dream of a complete conquest of Britannia perished. The wall would once again become the limit of the Roman world, a monument to an ambition that even an emperor's iron will could not fully realize. The frontier held, but at a terrible price, and the seeds of future conflict between his sons were already sown, a conflict that would soon rock the empire. The emperor's last stand was over, leaving the wall and its garrisons to face the enduring northern defiance alone, in the long shadow of his brutal, unfinished war. The campaign was a stark reminder that the land beyond the stone frontier possessed a resilience that could exhaust even the might of Rome itself. As the 3rd century unfolded, the certainties that had underpinned the Roman world began to fracture. On the empire's northernmost fringe, this crisis was not just military or political, but spiritual. The traditional pantheon of gods, Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, still received official worship in grand temples, their stone eagles gazing out over the frontier. Yet, in the hearts of the soldiers and civilians who lived in the wall's shadow, new faiths were taking root, promising a more personal and profound connection to the divine. Among the most powerful was the cult of Mithras, a god of Persian origin whose worship was carried across the empire by soldiers. At forts like Caroburg and Housesteads, Mithraic temples, or Mithraea, were built small, subterranean chambers designed to mimic the cave where the god was said to have slain a sacred bull. Here, in the flickering lamplight, away from the public eye, initiates underwent secret rites and shared communal meals. For the soldier facing the constant threat of the northern frontier, the appeal was immense. Mithraism offered a structured hierarchy, a sense of brotherhood, and the promise of salvation through a powerful, warrior-like deity. It was a faith for a world of order, struggle, and eventual triumph. But another, quieter faith was also spreading through the vici and garrisons. It was the religion of a crucified carpenter from Judea. At first, Christianity was a minor, often misunderstood sect. Its message of humility, universal love, and salvation for all, regardless of status, was a stark contrast to the martial values of Mithras or the civic duty of the state cults. Evidence for its early presence is subtle and scarce. A Chi-Rho symbol scratched onto a stone, a piece of silver plate from a house church. For decades, it existed in the shadows, a private belief for a scattered few. The great shift came with Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century. His conversion and the subsequent Edict of Milan in 313 AD transformed Christianity from a persecuted cult into the favored religion of the empire. The eagle of Rome now flew alongside the cross. Along the wall, this change was gradual but profound. Old temples slowly fell into disuse, their stones sometimes repurposed for new churches. The spiritual landscape of the frontier was being redrawn. The soldier on the wall now looked not only to the emperor for his security, but to a new god for his eternal soul. This profound transformation in belief marked a fundamental turning point, signaling that the very foundations of Roman identity were changing, even here, at the edge of the world. For nearly 3 centuries, the wall had been a constant, a symbol of Rome's enduring power. But by the latter half of the 4th century, that power was fading, and the frontier felt the tremors of a distant, ailing heart. The year 367 AD delivered a cataclysmic shock known as the Great Conspiracy. A coordinated assault by Picts from the north, Scots from Ireland, and Saxons from the sea, combined with a mutiny from the garrison on the wall itself, shattered the defenses of Britannia. The frontier was overrun, its commanders lost, and the province plunged into chaos. Order was eventually restored by the skilled general Count Theodosius, but the illusion of impenetrable security was gone forever. The wall was repaired, but it was never the same. Garrisons were thinned, their numbers drawn away to fight endless civil wars and defend other, more threatened frontiers in Gaul and along the Danube. For the soldiers stationed on the wall, the world was shrinking. Pay, once regular, became sporadic, delivered in debased currency or not at all. New recruits were no longer legionaries from distant lands, but local Britons serving to defend their own homes rather than a remote emperor. Imagine a man whose father and grandfather had stood watch on these same ramparts. For him, the eagle standard was not just an emblem of the army, but the sigil of his entire world, his identity. Now he sees the mile castles crumbling, the supply lines thinning. He hears rumors of legions withdrawn, of usurpers rising and falling on the continent. The northern tribes grow bolder, their raids more frequent. He and his comrades are increasingly on their own, a forgotten outpost at the edge of a collapsing empire. The final act came not with a climactic battle, but with a piece of parchment. In 410 AD, with Rome itself under sack by the Visigoths, the British civitates, or civic authorities, sent a desperate plea for military aid to the Emperor Honorius. The reply was stark and unequivocal. The rescript of Honorius told the Britons to look to their own defenses. There were no more legions coming. There were no more orders. Rome's long goodbye was complete. The last legionary stood on the wall, no longer a soldier of the empire, but simply a Briton facing a dark, uncertain future. The stone line he guarded was no longer a frontier of a global superpower, but the lonely inheritance of a people abandoned by their masters, left to forge a new destiny in the ruins of the old world. What happens when an empire evaporates? For the people of northern Britannia, the 5th century provided a stark and brutal answer. With the departure of the last legions and the severing of official ties to Rome, the intricate system of law, commerce, and military command that had defined life for 300 years simply dissolved. The wall, once the clear-cut edge of the Roman world, lost its imperial purpose overnight. It ceased to be a functioning military frontier. The power vacuum left in Rome's wake was immense and chaotic. The centralized structure of the province fractured into a patchwork of small, competing territories ruled by local strongmen or warlords. These were the figures who would inspire the legends of Britain's heroic age, the embryonic kings of a post-Roman world. Many were likely descended from the Romano-British aristocracy. Commandeering what remained of the old order, villas became fortified halls, towns became personal strongholds. The wall itself became a contested landmark and a convenient quarry. Its perfectly dressed stones, a legacy of imperial engineering, were systematically plundered to build new churches, defensive walls for local settlements, and halls for the new British chieftains. The great forts like Vindolanda and Housesteads were not always abandoned. Archaeology reveals a new, cruder phase of occupation. Grand Roman headquarters and bathhouses were repurposed, their interiors subdivided with rough timber walls to create smaller dwellings. The neat, orderly grid of the Roman fort gave way to the more organic, clustered settlement of a British warlord's court. Life became intensely local. The vast trade network that brought Spanish olive oil and Gallic wine to the frontier collapsed. Pottery was now coarse and locally made. The people of the wall region were thrown back on their own resources, their horizons shrinking from the breadth of an empire to the distance a man could ride in a day. This new world was also increasingly violent. Without the cohesive power of the legions, the north was vulnerable. Pictish raids from beyond the Fourth Clyde line intensified. Scotti from Ireland established kingdoms on the western coast. And from the east came a new threat. Seafaring Germanic peoples, the Angles and Saxons, initially mercenaries, soon to become conquerors. The wall, no longer a barrier against the north, became a silent witness to a multi-sided struggle for land and power. It stood as a relic of a lost golden age, its stones echoing with the memory of a unified world, while all around it, a new, fragmented, and violent era was being born. Empires fall, legions depart, but the stones remain. After the chaos of the post-Roman centuries, Hadrian's Wall settled into a long twilight, becoming a silent feature of the northern landscape. For over 1,000 years, it was a landmark, a boundary, and above all, a quarry. Medieval castles, churches, and farmhouses rose from its deconstructed forts and curtain wall, the labor of Roman soldiers repurposed for a new age. Its Roman name was forgotten, its original purpose shrouded in myth. To the venerable Bede in the 8th century, it was a marvel of a lost civilization. To local farmers, it was the Picts' Wall, a mysterious remnant of a mythic past. The wall's rebirth began not with soldiers, but with scholars. In the 16th and 17th centuries, antiquarians like William Camden journeyed to the remote northern frontier, rediscovering the wall and correctly identifying it as a Roman creation. They mapped its course and marveled at its scale, beginning the long process of rescuing it from obscurity. But the wall's greatest savior was a 19th-century lawyer and landowner named John Clayton. Inheriting the land that contained several of the most important forts, including housesteads and chesters, Clayton dedicated his life and fortune to its preservation. He halted the quarrying, excavated the forts, and established a museum for his findings. He was the first to treat the wall not as a ruin, but as a precious archaeological treasure, preserving a huge portion of it for posterity. His work paved the way for the systematic archaeological investigation that continues to this day. Modern science has peeled back the layers of earth and time, revealing not just a military barrier, but a vibrant, multicultural society. The Vindolanda tablets give us the voices of its inhabitants, their letters revealing concerns about socks, birthday invitations, and the quality of the local beer. We now know the wall was home to soldiers from across the empire: Syrians, Spaniards, and Belgians who lived, worked, and raised families alongside local Britons. Today, Hadrian's Wall is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, walked by thousands of visitors each year. It is no longer a line of division, but a thread of connection to a deep and complex past. It snakes across the rolling hills of Northumberland, a 73-mile-long testament to ambition, engineering, and endurance. It reminds us that borders are not just lines on a map. They are places where cultures meet, where identities are forged, and where history is written and rewritten in stone. What happens when an empire dies not with a bang, but with a whisper? For centuries, this was the edge of the world. Hadrian's Wall, a 73-mile testament to Roman engineering and military might, a bulwark against the untamed lands of the north. Legions marched its ramparts, merchants traded in the shadow of its forts, and a unique Romano-British culture flourished. But in the year 410 AD, the heart of the empire faltered. Rome, facing threats at its core, recalled its legions from the farthest frontiers. An official decree coldly informed the Britons to look to their own defenses. Imagine the final Roman centurion standing on the ramparts of a fort like Vindolanda, taking one last look at the misty hills. He hears not the call to battle, but the order to retreat. The eagles were leaving. The garrisons emptied, the barracks fell silent, the forges grew cold. The greatest military machine the world had ever known simply packed up and walked away, leaving behind a stone behemoth that would outlast the civilization that built it. The men were gone, but the wall remained, a permanent scar on the earth. The year is 4110. On the northern edge of a dying empire, the wind carries a bitter truth. For 3 centuries, this wall of stone and turf has been the limit of the known world. Now, it is a line of retreat. Centurion Marcus Aquilas stands on the rampart of Vercovicium, the cold air biting at his face. Below, the final legion prepares to depart. The eagle, the soul of Rome, is furled for its journey south, never to return. There are no grand speeches, only the clang of armor, the creak of leather, and the silent, watchful eyes of the Britons who will be left behind. This is not a glorious victory march, it is an abandonment. A vast military machine, built to last an eternity, is being dismantled in a single, somber morning. The air is thick with the unspoken weight of farewell, the end of an order that had defined life and land for generations. The great Roman experiment in Britain is over. Silence descends upon the forts. It is a profound quiet, heavier than the stone it now fills. Where legions once drilled, only the wind now marches, whispering through empty barracks and echoing in deserted bathhouses. The pulse of Rome has stopped. In the dust its ghosts remain. A child's leather shoe, a gaming piece dropped in haste, a shard of fine Samian ware fragments of lives suddenly interrupted. The local tribes, the Votadini Brigantes, approach these stone behemoths with caution. They touch the perfectly squared blocks, the ornate carvings, with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They are inheriting a world they did not build, a landscape littered with the monumental refuse of a vanished power. The men in iron armor are gone, but their presence is baked into the very earth, a memory that clings to every silent, imposing stone. A wall without sentinels is no longer a border, it is a monument to a forgotten purpose. The signal fires on the mile castles are extinguished forever. The great stone barrier, 73 miles of imperial will, now stands mute. Its strategic meaning has evaporated. Soon, it finds a new purpose. For the Romano-British farmers building new homes in a less certain world, the wall is a convenient quarry, a source of pre-cut, high-quality stone. Carts rattle away, laden with the pieces of empire. From the north, the Picts and Scots no longer see a fortification to be stormed, but a crumbling ridge to be crossed. They walk through the growing gaps, not as invaders, but as travelers on a landscape reasserting its own ancient pathways. The wall has ceased to command. It has begun to decay, its authority crumbling stone by stone. Centuries pass. The works of emperors and legions face a new, more patient adversary, nature itself. A relentless green tide washes over the Roman frontier. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, cloaks the ramparts, its tendrils probing for weakness. Seeds find purchase in the mortar, and saplings sprout from the floors of commandants' houses. Their roots, slow and powerful, break apart mosaic floors and topple finely carved columns. The rigid, masculine lines of Roman engineering are softened, blurred, and consumed by the wild. Soil and turf accumulate, burying entire sections of the wall, hiding gateways and towers beneath gentle, grassy mounds. The frontier is not erased, but absorbed. It becomes a skeleton of stone hidden just beneath the skin of the living landscape, a testament to the quiet, inexorable victory of the earth. Even after a millennium of plunder and the slow siege of nature, the wall endures. It is no longer a barrier of soldiers but a landmark of memory. It runs across the land like a geological feature, as much a part of the landscape as the basalt crags on which it is built. It is the permanent scar of an empire. The legions marched away, the emperors turned to dust, and the Latin tongue faded into a whisper. But this line, drawn with sweat and stone, remains. It is the final, unblinking witness to Roman ambition in this remote province. It reminds us that while civilizations fall and power is fleeting, the marks they leave upon the world can be as lasting as the hills themselves. The empire is a ghost, but its shadow, etched 73 miles long across the earth, is eternal.